Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Saturday free show edition of This is Revolution podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles. If you haven't already done it, please hit the like. If you haven't already done it, please subscribe to the show so we can show up in those algorithms, get more people to check us out. We have a very interesting topic today. It has caused me to have a very hilarious off-air conversation with I don't really want to say our guest. I would say that this is a panel discussion with everyone in the universe except for Djene Bajalan. So let me bring on my homie, my dog. He is the man of the Mau Mau Hour. You probably have recently watched his Mau Mau Hour episode on class war. And hopefully you guys checked out the Thanksgiving episode with Jeff Perry on Hubert Harrison. So let me bring in my homie, my dog, the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles. Jason, I'd like to tell you something.
Yes.
I humbly, I want to tell you, I'm very, very, very content with the quality of programming that we put out for the last few days.
Yes.
And I really felt that we made some impactful contributions based on the feedback I got on our Hubert Harrison show. People who told me they were never familiar with him, young people. I was very happy about that. And the Mau Mau episode, I felt was very important.
I sometimes fail to send you all of the positive messages that we've been getting lately, especially through Patreon as our Patreon growth has happened. And all of this is surprising to Pascal and I. You know, you hope that your show gets out to more people and they appreciate it, but you when you're in the moment, it's really kind of overwhelming. And the response that we've gotten, I'll have to share with you some messages, have been really, really some kind responses. So thank you all to everyone that sent some positive messages, because you know this is I won't get into it, but it's hard work, and we definitely appreciate all of the attaboys that we get. So also we have another member of the TIR family. He is going to be a co-host on an upcoming sports show we're going to be doing on Sundays. Very, very excited about that. He was the black man in Maine. Now he is the, when I say the, I mean the most important black man maybe on his block. Because I can't say in all of Virginia because there's just a lot of Negroes there. He is Marcus of the Left Flank Vets.
I'll say probably top 3 black guy on my apartment complex floor. If I lived on the 3rd floor, I'd definitely be top 2.
There's like some real deal, like
There's some dope motherfuckers around.
yeah, there's some like
people
real
doing
deal
some shit.
Negroes down there.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
oh wow, that's what you do. That's very interesting. You work in policy.
Oh wow.
I have a show. Oh, just a podcast. Yes.
Just internet personality for dozens of people.
I do want to say that is a lovely sweatshirt that you're wearing, limited edition, might I add.
Yeah.
That will never be made again. I decided we will never make those again. So I think that was the last one I sent out was to you. I don't even have one.
Bitter Lake.
And there's a new Bitter Lake album that's out, instrumental record. So if you guys like the music that you hear and the clips in the show, that's basically what it is. Also, coming at us all the way live from a bunker somewhere in the great Northwest. She is a show contributor as well. I did say she. There's an actual woman coming on the show. Disturbing the Sausage Fest. She is Summer Tan. Summer, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry. I figure it's dangerous to have this show without the women's perspective. So despite the risk of knowing things I shouldn't and revealing things I shouldn't that destroy our relationship, I'm here.
I'm totally glad you're here for it, Summer. It makes me feel better.
Thank you.
When I got the message, my first instinct is always like, yeah. You know, if I get a message like, oh, you know, Summer, yeah, of course, Summer, come on. But then I was like, oh, wait a minute. We're actually talking about dudes and their women's struggles. So Summer's just going to be on there and like, nah.
Well, I see the suffering in human experience in general, and I'm sorry that men suffer a lot in this. But that's a good reason why gender equality is good for both or all gender. So.
Well, speaking of all genders, this next person is actually genderless because that is how middle management in the Death Star works. He is the Ken doll of the Deep State. He is Deep State Kuba. You need. I'm going to bring you in with a theme song from now.
Summer.
Hmm?
What would my theme song be?
I don't know. I got to think of one that won't.
I got one. Dun, 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 dun,
I'm literally fighting with YouTube right now.
That would definitely get a copyright strike.
Yeah, I'm fighting a copyright thing right now on my own music. They're trying to say that my music isn't mine, so I'm fighting that right now, which is really pissing me off.
A friend of mine has
Shitty.
graduate school had the final countdown, you know, as his custom ring for me. Dun, 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 dun. You know, like that sound check or riff from the 90s. So I'm dreading having another involuntary theme song attached to me. And this
I will find a suitable theme song because you coming on without a theme song, it's kind of fucked up, man. And let's bring in.
It is, man. Get on that.
Let's bring in the person of the hour who actually wrote the piece about which we will be discussing. He is affectionately known as Thor Guevara, which I still think is the funniest shit ever. And I wish that Stefan would just put Thor Guevara on your thing so we can let's just call you that from now on, Stefan. Stefan is a dead name. It's Thor Guevara. TG. Stefan Bertram Lee.
Nice to meet you.
Hi. I was very impressed that Cuba's connection is so much worse than Summer's, even though they're like presumably about 3 meters away from each other.
They should just touch hands.
Mine just has to go through a number of lang gaps.
Yeah, you're behind 7 proxies. That's why it's so bad. You're spoofing your location all across the world so that Jason can't know where you are.
Yeah, technically I'm on Wallace and Fort. Thank you very much.
Let me ask the first question here, which is, and then I'll get out of the way because I always have the worst connection. Ultimately, we have to get some terminology defined. So, and I think you in your article you really lay out what an incel really is, because it actually made me rethink what I thought an incel was. So, can you first of all tell us, what is an incel? What is an anti-natalist? And then, black pill, red pill. Like, what do all these terms mean when we discuss this phenomenon?
So incel, at least how it started out, actually, the classic story is actually the first incel, the first person to use this word was actually a woman. And by in its basic terms, all that incel means is a contraction of involuntary celibate, as in someone that would like to have sex, but it's not. But what's changed recently, like a descriptor, like a pure kind of a description of a certain person which is not doing a certain thing or is doing a certain thing. Rather, it's become kind of a subculture or something like this, where in essence, an incel is not someone who is not having sex, but likely, because that's millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people. Rather than incel is a person who's not having sex and is kind of building their whole identity around this. The whole kind of their life revolves around this. And in more recent development, incels have become associated with the idea of the black pill. And the black pill, which stands in contrast to something like the red pill, which I can talk about in a minute, is basically the idea that if you're in a certain way, if you're a man who's kind of short and ugly and this kind of sort of thing, it's always based on traits that you can't really do much about. You're kind of doomed, basically. Doomed in general, that you won't have a good life kind of financially, successfully, or anything like this. But more specifically, especially, you don't have any chance of having like a sexual relationship.
Did we lose Stefan Fries?
Should I just continue on? And so the red pill was the idea that was a previous idea, which is basically the idea that women, it's kind of, they both originate how their foundations on misogynistic ideas. The red pill was basically the idea that your stories you've heard that kind of, the best way to impress a woman is to be like a relatively normal guy who has social skills and is nice but not too nice, and kind of like does the things they like but doesn't go along with everything, and some kind of like moderate thing, and you kind of, you wash yourself and you're relatively attractive. This is all just fake. And instead, the best way to attract women is to basically be like psychologically manipulative. And the black pill was an innovation
kind of model.
Yeah, exactly. But obviously this stuff doesn't really work. And so for a lot of people, I think for some guys, they basically tried this. It didn't work. And instead concluding that kind of the whole red pill thing was fake, they were like, no, actually that's not true. Women are even more simpler. We're going to be even more sexist. And basically say, women are attracted to like hot guys who have a certain physical look. And if you don't have that look, you're doomed. It's over. That's it. That's the end of you. You've got no chance. And so these people go online and they wrote on forums.
So let me ask you a question, Stefan. What is the correlation between men's rights groups and men's rights activism and the men's rights movement and the birth of particularly online incel culture?
So at the start, these movements were all kind of meshed together. You had like the men's rights activists. You had this other thing, which is men going their own way, which is like a very insipid kind of male separatist movement, which never really went anywhere or did any kind of real separatism. You had the red pill people, and you had incels. And especially like in 2016, as you can read in a book like Kill All Normies, these movements were all kind of meshed together. But since then, they've kind of broken into pieces and become separated. There aren't really many, I mean, maybe there are red pill people still around, red pill men, but I don't really see much of them. These movements have slowly been pulled apart. And for me, my perspective on things is that incels, despite being portrayed in this way, aren't kind of a political movement of any kind. Because, right, you've never heard of like an incel protest or an incel, unlike, say, men's rights activists, or like fathers' rights activists, or other kind of like men-based movements. There's no kind of incel movement. There's no university clubs. There's no kind of protests for incels or anything like this. Rather, all you hear about incels in kind of a political sense is that occasionally one of them just goes so mad that they go on a killing spree, which I don't think makes something a political movement.
Is it safe to say that the rise of all of this discourse, ranging from men's rights activism to the incel discourse, is a consequence of a sentiment? The key word is a sentiment among a certain cadre of men who feel that they are aggrieved because the quote-unquote advances of second and third wave feminism have displaced them, and as a result, according to their belief, their normative ability to fulfill what is deemed the role of manhood is being threatened. Do you think that's part of the motivation behind this phenomenon?
It's definitely like, that's a key thing for traditionally the red pill idea, where kind of, you know how there's kind of Nazis who have this conspiracy that kind of culture or, you know, kind of tricking the West and destroying the West. Red pillers had a very similar idea with kind of feminism, that kind of like women and feminists were kind of behind all the ills of society. But the thing with incels is, obviously they have this belief, but it's become at this point, I think, very backgrounded. When you go on an incel forum, the forums that you can find, there doesn't really seem to be much concern in this way. It's just guys kind of just talking about how bad things are for themselves. And for me, incel forums and places like this have a much stronger connection to like places like mental health forums and places on Reddit like r/short and r/small dick problems, of people who have these physical traits that they can't change and are quite desperate to change, but feel they have no real option of being able to do so, and kind of just despair online about it.
Is it safe to say that the incel, all of this crisis of masculinity phenomenon, is this rooted in the way in which capitalism or political economy has rendered men somewhat more precarious in the economy because there's more competition in the workspace for women? Also, we know logically if women have economic options, they are not going to acquiesce to subservience the way that they may have done in the past. And we also know that in the traditional kind of patriarchal marital paradigm, rooted in masculinist capacity to earn or be a wage earner, the breadwinner narrative, right? Which, as we know, right, which is a very important thing to note, that narrative is really a kind of post-New Deal narrative of the kind of father knows best, middle class guy who is the breadwinner, the wife is home in a nice dress,
Do you want to join me?
Raising the kids and everything's okay. It's actually policy and government largesse that even makes that kind of 1950s leave it to beaver imagery possible.
Yeah, I agree completely.
But
So
is it the inability to live up to that really contrived standard that is causing this kind of crisis of masculinity that's manifested from incels to men's rights activists, red pill, black pill, all of the above?
Yeah, I mean, so historically we always had spare men. This is kind of one of the incel ideas of them being leftover or spare men. But in the past, you had institutions like monasteries and things like this that these young men would go off to, and then more recently, the army and things like this. And then, of course, as you say, this problem was very briefly solved from maybe 1950 to 1980, where, in fact, for a while, we basically had no spare men or very few spare men, where everyone was kind of, not everyone, obviously, and there's whole racial dimensions, whatever, but for the greatest time in history, you had all of these people having like a successful, normal life. And then kind of neoliberalism has happened. This whole thing has been detonated. And those institutions that men used to go into, like monasteries and so on, have been detonated too. So you have spare men, but without the institutions that in the past you had a place to put them in. And so they're kind of, they're not just spare men without women and these conventional lifestyles, but they don't have anything to go into. They don't have any kind of alternative life. And so, yeah, they try and find community online, but these communities are incredibly toxic, and I think just makes things worse for themselves. Obviously for other people too, but considering, the ratio of incels to incels who commit massacre, I think actually the primary person they're victimizing is just themselves.
Summer,
so interesting.
you want to chime in? I'd like to pivot to you.
Thank you. Because I had a thought and question. Because you mentioned this spare man, I think it's really interesting because remember I read an academic paper about the source of CCP's victory in China, why Communist Party won. And one of the very interesting angle is that Mao and the Communist Party kind of employ this policy to kind of, I wouldn't say force monogamy, but to like encourage every man to find his women and women find his men to form this little 2 or 3 person, the baby is the third person, economic unit and give them land. In this way, it stabilized the kind of liberated area, or that's literally what it is, 解放区in Chinese, for better economic productivity. So when you said that, I just feel like Mao had probably thought about it and somehow sorted it out at the beginning or during the Civil War with the nationalists. That's my thought. Which is I am welcome feedback, and I also have a question. So is there there's obviously an option to choose between black and red pill. I wonder if there's any statistics or any observation about what kind of, if there's any kind of men that would do certain options, especially like with regards to social status. Are higher status men tend to do red instead of black?
Yeah, I mean, that was my assumption too, that kind of the red pill is a bad strategy, but if that you're a high status man who's relatively attractive, you can still succeed using it. And then you'll kind of delude yourself into thinking the red pill's the right way. While if you're already like an unattractive, badly socialized, low status guy or whatever, and you try and employ red pill strategies, you'll obviously almost certainly fail because they revolve around being unpleasant. But I don't know any studies or statistics which look into this. Because my impression definitely is that the black pill is more common than the red pill these days. And I was trying to Google it, but it's all thrown out of whack because the red pill is actually from the Matrix movie, while the black pill is like just a thing they made up. And so the red pill's always having more stats to it, even though in reality, I think the black pill is more popular. So it's hard to investigate on that basis.
There's a really horrible movie called The Red Pill that I watched on accident on Amazon, and it's about a woman that says she was a feminist, and then she met men's rights activists, and they showed her the way.
Oh
of
wow.
the red pill. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
And what's a very interesting twist, if we're going to talk about anti-natalists later, the main anti-natalist philosopher, who I've now forgotten the name of, South African guy, he's also a men's rights activist. So
Wow.
yeah, it's wheels inside wheels, it all connects up.
They were having a men's right protest in the beginning of the film too. There was probably like 11 dudes that were mad. I can't remember what they were mad about, but I think it had something to do with women.
I guess I have a question too. Of like, when you talk about stats, what's your best guess as far as the significance, of these groups of individuals? And I'd say first, like especially too of like, as it relates to this, this can be an ideology or some belief that leads people to do something dangerous, which is absolutely concerning. But I guess like, yeah, what's your best guess as far as the overall, what is the larger, population of people who you think are engaging in this? And the potential for later on issues.
Yeah, so I think this is a reason to be really kind of concerned with incels and the black pill and all these kind of ideas, because if we look at statistics, we can see that a massive number of men and women, especially young people that kind of came to adulthood during the pandemic and you really had no chance to have sex, have never had sex, or for older people, they haven't had sex in a very long time. And obviously, some people just don't have sex. But I imagine for most of these people, they prefer to be having sex, or at least occasionally, whatever. And so and then I think there's not very many incels, as in people who then build an identity around it. But I think they have a massive potential base of people. And it's a very toxic identity that will make things worse for them and worse for others. So I think it is important to be concerned because of this.
Kuba, you want to jump in? I guess not.
Kuba, can you hear us?
He's speaking on the other side. I can hear him talking in real life, but so it's very.
Oh, is he
Wait.
What, is he not?
I think he's still talking.
Yeah, he just started talking now on stream. What the fuck?
Wait.
I feel bad for him. I feel bad.
I'm so good.
He just needs to go sit next to someone and they can share a headphone.
By the way, I did not know that Kuba had the skill where he could talk without moving his lips. That's some deep state shit. That was
To prove that
impressive.
he's a robot.
Oh my god. Oh my god. I'm sorry. I'm so
He was
sorry.
literally talking without moving his lips. How did he do that?
Kuba talk.
It's so funny.
Dude, just walk on the other side of the table, man. You totally they got you this time.
Just break the fourth wall.
Just break the fourth wall.
Turns out we know each other.
I can't
So,
stop
Stefan, what I
laughing.
wanted to ask, right, is that what is the correlation between this discourse of men's rights activists, incels, red pill, blue pill, crisis of masculinity, and the rise of the reactionary right? And why is it, as we had a commenter here, I believe it was Andy William, and Andy William, who was one of our people in our chat, made a very good observation, and I agree with his observation, actually, that all of this paranoia around performative patriarchal positioning is absolute catnip for the reactionary right, not only in the United States, but everywhere. because I was doing some reading, and they were talking about fascism. And the thing that's fascinating is that the article said something I found interesting. It said fascism is a cultural project of male redemption.
Wow, that's a hell of a statement. That's a hell of a statement. Kuba, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I mean, I went from Chad to sad in like 5 minutes right there. I think that what Summer and Pascal are saying is that rather than gender relations and sort of family formation, relationship templates being something apolitical that's from the private realm, you actually have a great deal of political engineering of the relationships between men and women. In Poland, under communism, and as a kind of Eastern Bloc rule, you could only apply for housing if you were a couple, and under conditions of extreme scarcity, only if you were a couple with a child. Otherwise, you were living with your parents forever. And this created an incentive for people to pair up, completely apart from any questions of sexual or romantic attraction. And Jordan Peterson, famously, when the first incel debate came to the head of public discussion, talked about, we're going to redistribute sexual partners, maybe mandatory monogamy or something is our way out of this problem. And he was obviously intended it as a kind of provocation, help build his brand and force reassessment of the value of traditional monogamous, Christian family patterns. But he's actually tapping into something that existed in China, it existed in the Eastern Bloc.
It's becoming a global phenomenon. Do you remember that comedian? He's like a white guy or something, and he was doing a gig about ISIS, and he's like, those ISIS,
Oh yeah,
they stole my audience.
Yeah, Doug Stanhope has this great bit that the recruiting pool for ISIS is disaffected, angry young men on the internet. And he's like, ISIS, back off. That's my corner.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an incredible pool for so many different kinds of movements and people and whatever. Well, I mean, it's how you get lots of online communists as well.
Yes, exactly. It's we fished that pool, we fished that lake ourselves, and hopefully to better effect.
Well, here's the question. Let me ask you. Let's get to the crux of this. Does this phenomenon exist? Now I know that the men's rights activism thing predates the incel phenomenon. There were men's rights activists before the internet, right? The men's rights activists, for those who are unaware, originally started as a result of divorced or single men complaining about how family law or domestic marital law disadvantaged them in issues of child custody and support. And a lot of them were fathers who wanted custody of their children, and they felt that the family law system inherently benefited women, or the child support system inherently benefited women. So the early beginnings of the men's rights activists, and I'm not saying, I worked in family law, I'm not trying to give validity or criticism to the argument, but the early crux of the argument was about family structure and access to kids, and to be able to visit, father support.
I mean, it could be called critical gender theory if it developed in a different political direction.
Right. That was a kind of the original kind of manifestation. With the rise of the internet, particularly in the beginning of the millennium, the discourse changed, and it wasn't just simply about grievance about family law, child custody, child support. It started to become a kind of place where men would basically complain about the inability to have women adhere to their demands about what they think women should do relative to reacting to them. I.e., women aren't, quote unquote, what's the word I'm looking for? They aren't deferential enough, or they don't cater.
Submissive.
They don't cater to us enough. They're not submissive enough. So it starts to evolve in the internet in the digital age, right?
And it's interesting because it's a secularization of Christian conservative notions of the role of fathers and families as being patriarchs, enjoying headship, having authority, where it's not you. If you need the law to keep your woman in line, you aren't right with God.
It's beyond Christianity too, because Confucianism has the very same thing. So.
Right. So this whole kind of, this is very fascinating because there's a religious component, right? There's an economic component, and there's obviously a sexual component. But I would argue, and I really would like some feedback from you guys, is that these crises definitely have a material economic consequence, right? But I think that even without the 2008 crash, because the question I was going to ask is that if there is no 2008 crash, do we have the incel phenomenon? But I would argue that even if we didn't have the incel phenomenon post 2008, that there would be some form of contemporary crisis of masculinity provocation, simply because the way I look at it, and I like your guys' critique, is that with 2 generations into second wave feminism, and we're seeing young men who never grew up with that Ozzie and Harriet notion of parenthood, yearning for something that they really didn't see that much anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. 2008 was a good year for China. We still have incels. We also have feminists now.
I think it's a thing of like we've demolished this previous structure, and we've said it's now basically like a free for all, like in kind of romance and dating and
a market, if you will.
Yeah, very much. And I think we've got into a position where kind of we've got all these spare men and we don't have anything for them to do, really. When they fail, it's kind of just, in kind of social democracies or social liberal countries, they just kind of stay at home and live on state aid. And this is kind of like a really shitty version of like the monastic structures we used to have. We just don't have anything for men like this to do. And they realize this. Like, I think like black pill guys are kind of more reasonable and normal in lots of ways than red pill guys are. They're less kind of delusional. Like, some of them are definitely delusional. There's nothing really wrong with them. They have like a complex. But you look at some of these guys, and I read their kind of profiles on Reddit and elsewhere, and you look how they've lived and the condition they're in and what chances and opportunities they have, and you're like, no, you're right. You really are actually fucked.
This is really important, right? Because Summer, you want to follow up?
Oh, that was me. But I think that when it comes to the part of it is, I think, a side effect of a strain of Western culture that has sexual success as being one of the metrics of being a beautiful, successful person, right? That you are glamorous, you're desirable, it even gets tied into class, that money allows you access to more sexual partners, and you don't even have to choose between them. And you get to points when monogamy norms break down, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but one possible side effect is that, and I saw a feminist defense of Mormon polygamy made along the lines that most men are terrible, a small number of men are great. Why should women be limited to these terrible leftover men if they can just share one of the great ones? Like half of awesome, successful dude is better than 100% guy. From a strictly individual perspective, like happiness and welfare perspective, and even possibly from the perspective of fatherhood, that math may check out. But then you have, like Stefan was saying, all of these superfluous men in different regimes. You know, fascism has a solution for them. It's called war, right? It's called violence. Japan has a solution for them. It's called digital waifus and eventually sex bots.
Japan's better.
Yeah, Japan. I take that over the former. And in many other countries, they become exported as disposable labor, like in India, Pakistan, the Philippines. You have, well, India and Pakistan, certainly, you'll have men sent to Dubai, sent to the Emirates, sent elsewhere, where they live gender segregated, away from women, away from not just their own women, but the ability to meet women of any kind. And they're just worked until they either have enough of an economic stake to go back and potentially meet someone, or they meet an untimely demise. There are also countries where the reverse is true. In the greater Russosphere and in the Philippines, I think that when it comes to young women, there's an imbalance in the other direction. There's a shortage of men, and that creates its own different types of challenges, where you have the export of lots of female labor, sometimes into the sex industry, sometimes into housemaids, sometimes domestic service, or sometimes just a kind of brain drain of high-end skilled labor as well, while the women who are left have to viciously compete with one another to try to monopolize whatever quality of man they can get a hold of. So the old religious and cultural templates prevented this sexual competition from becoming like a market, from becoming like, para-capitalistic. But gradually, as we've dismantled all of them, then it becomes an accelerator, an amplifier of the economic competition and the economic monopoly that you see over wealth and property in the material economy.
It's like sex almost become an alternative to economic success, and sometimes a symbol of those.
Well, there's another fascinating component here as well, right? Is that the question becomes, and this is my position, there is a reason rooted in capitalist political economy as to why there is a logic to this male obsolescence or rendering of men as obsolete. And I'm going to be very frank, and some people may not want to hear it. Female labor has a serious advantage over men in two regards. It's cheaper and it's less rebellious.
Yeah.
Prone to pregnancy disruptions, but
did you hear that? That was the sound of the show being canceled. I
mean, cheaper is
well,
yeah.
I
It's
think
a contingent factor.
advantage
It's certainly
as
been
to
a fact.
whom.
Say again,
It's
Stefan.
advantage.
Can you repeat that, Stefan?
Well, it's just, if we look at history, we can probably say this is true, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily true, right?
I mean,
It's not essential to the gender.
I'm not saying it's just. It's just a consequence of the way in which female labor is exploited in a way in which, because they're deemed to be, they take too many days or whatever the justification. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but the reality is that women get paid less for the same tasks as men, and women have a tendency to be less rebellious in the workspace than men.
Are you saying
child hostages?
Venus?
But it's all our workplace.
I mean, when you read Capital, like the kind of the most intensive and like long working hours of any practice that Marx describes are women workers. Like the men is obviously like heavier work, but in terms of hours, it was definitely the women throughout Capital.
Yeah, and women take on these heavy work of house duties, while a lot of them doing those while they're supporting the family. So they're kind of like double contributing to the household, while part of that is unrecognized.
One of the main crises for like Victorian moralists, and one of the reasons they were kind of concerned with reducing working hours, is the proletarian women would work these incredible hours, and obviously they wouldn't be able to homemake. It was simply impossible. And they, like bourgeois or like aristocratic people, would visit the houses and be like, "Oh, the women aren't doing the thing," and they're like, "Oh shit, really? We've forced a system which is going to destroy exactly the things that we hold sacred." I mean, that's just been the past couple 100 years.
I think people are mistaking
also.
I'm not arguing that this is some kind of ontological, biological thing. I'm saying
not sexual essentialism.
Yeah, no, it's not sexual essentialism. This is the way in which, under the parameters of capitalism, female labor is used. I'm not advocating that this is a good thing or a natural thing. It's a product of the structure and the way it exists and how it frames the utility of female labor.
There's also an intersection in more patriarchal, sexist societies, and my mister is a good example, or in China, South Korea, China, where female labor also doesn't need to be considered for promotion. It is not a threat to executives or leaders. So you can use women, you can put them to work, you can have them do excessive hours, but not only are they less likely to unionize or complain in a working class environment, but in a white collar environment, they know that they're going to tap out, and they're less likely to engage in the bureaucratic competition over promotion, less likely to be a rival when opportunities do come up to advance. And this makes them very handy to have around.
Yeah, and you can fire them before they want to get a baby, and you're going to say that you're not going to be around. Why should I keep you?
Exactly. And the great thing is they don't even have to be pregnant. You just have to tell people they were.
I think some of those like might be concerning in like a upcoming conflict within I guess like within labor, is that capitalism requires line go up, which would mean more workers producing more things, on like a basic level of you do have a pushback now, not like and that's just like when Stefan is like talking about this very focused incel group, may not be political onto itself, but it does tie into things. And I think people who are, extremely political, where I think it's a guy who's running for Senate in Arizona, where like he does like a video like every week with a different gun that he has. But part of
named after women.
Part of his pitch is that no family should have to, like you shouldn't have to have two breadwinners. He doesn't have an explanation, like a policy solution as to how to make that happen. It's just something that he says this should be, which it seems to be an upcoming growing conflict as the reactionary right grows. this is something that's going to probably grow as well. And how does that buttress up against capital?
If people ever want any evidence of what I'm saying, there's a great video, Richard Wolff, after the 2008 crash, where he talks about 50, 60 years of American economics. And he talks about the effect of the increase of female participation in American capitalism with the rise of second wave feminism. And the first thing he says is that one of the contributing facets of the influx of women into the labor market was the decrease of wages. That wages actually start to go down as a way of justifying the fact that women can be paid less. And also it increases more labor participation. So the more you have people competing for labor, you can drive down the wages.
And there's also interesting work that I've seen on the depression of wages and status in occupations that become feminized. So when academia was male dominated and elite, the sort of peer economic status group for professors was executives or high-end professionals. And as academia has become more and more female, I'm not entirely convinced that this is entirely causative, but as academia becomes more and more female, you get fewer and fewer tenure offers, more and more graduate students doing the teaching, lower and lower wages, and general devaluation of the professor from like a 1950s, let me explain to you what the solar system is like, Billy, to SJW figures of hate. It used to be that every professor had a Jordan Peterson level of prestige that they could tap into, but now they're lucky if Fox News doesn't drag them through the mud because of the war on Christmas.
Right. So, I mean, the larger point I'm trying to say, right, is that, I don't think any of us I definitely don't want to go back to the bad old days where women did not have career choices. And we're not going to go back to those days. We're already reaching a point now where over 50% of college-educated
Pascal, what I think people are extremely oversimplifying is that you said women being less rebellious. So now you have a lot of people in the chat like, wait a minute.
You have a lot of rebellious women trying to prove you wrong.
I'm rebellious. I'm a woman. What the fuck, man?
I mean,
what do you mean I'm not a rebellious woman? There's nurses.
And these are the same people who complain about toxic masculinity and saying that women are not rebellious. I mean, when I'm not saying that women just sit down and they
Jordan Peterson hole right now. So just hold on.
Well, if I may, I think a white man needs to come to the rescue at this point. There's a material explanation for why female workers might be more compliant than male workers, and that has to do with
children.
The fact that they have children and parents too. Children, elderly parents, they have an obligation of care, which often makes them much more dependent on wage earning. Like the job that they're doing is the one which keeps the people that they love alive. Where often males who have people that they're looking after also have a female partner that can help share that burden, and therefore you have more room to resist. I don't think it's temperamental. I don't think it has anything to do with, and I don't think Pascal was making a sort of sexually essentialist point. I think it's just the sad fact that employers understand that a lot of women who accept jobs in difficult conditions for low wages do it because they have to, and they do it because somebody's depending on them at home, and that becomes an implicit hostage.
Yeah, also you as a woman, I constantly feel insecure in a lot of places. I feel like physically I'm not as strong, and then therefore I think about whenever I do something, I think about consequences of getting revenge, and also it's a patriarchy right there. So like you do feel a lot of the insecurities, and these do not necessarily make you more rebellious. It makes you think about those situations more. And I personally have always been like a bit too rebellious in the environment where I grew up, and I receive some shit from like relative, like, oh, like people like you, girls like you would have problems.
We should call up Catherine Liu right now and have her jump in here and defend Pascal. Because the PMC culture is a culture in which you see a lot of that, where people don't want to rebel as much, especially.
I never made the argument that women biologically or genetically or essentially do not rebel at work. There are material reasons, i.e., one of the most, having children, having secondary family obligations, parents, that require
like
them to
Beauvoir
accept.
said, they're distracted.
I saw someone in chat a while
I
back.
sympathize with Pascal.
I saw someone in chat a while ago that was mad that we weren't talking about men enough. We're just talking about women. We called it crisis of masculinity. We talking about women.
Very incels take.
I was going to say about what the other thing that Pascal was saying at the time, that one of the key things that is constantly going on is that kind of the right correctly identifies real problems that are happening, but they're absolutely wedded to capital, and it's capital that normally is causing these problems. And so there can never be any kind of, the right can never resolve this contradiction. It just accelerates further and further because they're always wedded to capital. Like, imagine how much we'd have to change the economic structure of America so that you could raise 2 kids, like an average person could raise 2 kids and their stay-at-home partner on 1 wage. That like 50% of Americans at least could do that. Like, how much would you have to change? Like, more than Bernie offered on even his most radical day, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it's not even that far, I thought, because we have a friend. He is a stay-home dad right now, and while his wife is working.
Kuba.
Kuba, yeah.
But that's an example. They both work in the public sector in Canada, and it works great for them. And similarly, European social welfare states, the more generous ones that don't,
you get a year
necessarily,
you get a year in Canada, right?
I
think women
don't
get a year,
know.
and men get 6 months.
I think it can be up to a year.
Yeah.
And in this case, for the first child, the mother took maternity. For the second child, the father took paternity. And we got back in touch pretty well because he was bored out of his mind. And there are ways to try to structure social benefits that enable people to have, in a capitalist economy, in a social democratic flavored capitalist economy, have some prospect for materially starting a family. I think in the US, among the conservatives, especially, I like to read the Christian conservative and the NatCon types because they remind me of old country fascism. And I'm like, these guys. And they're very critical of capitalism and globalists, and they want a situation in which there is more support for Americans to start families, but it all of their solutions run through some kind of moralistic, patriarchal structure where you would get benefits for being married, you would have benefits for having legitimate children, and the benefits would flow through either the husband or through or to the children directly. And their idea is to use this. They're no longer enamored of capital. They would prefer some state intervention to recreate the moral monopoly of their particular form of traditionalism, whether it's religious or nationalist or
But
or otherwise.
This is the conundrum. This is the puzzle. This is the problem we have here with this incel and this crisis of masculinity. Ultimately, this is about men wanting to limit the ability of women to have choices. That's really what it comes down to.
There's one social alternative in China where both parents would work after they give birth to a baby. Their parents would come to help because they're kind of bored, they're retired, they have extra energy. Some are voluntary, some are kind of forced by the young couple, so that the young couple wouldn't sacrifice their life. However, it is the parents who's, and it's like, I wouldn't say brainwashed, but like it's quite widespread, and in the point that my parents, and like that's the way my family does things and my parents offer. I just think that's horrific. Like, if you cannot take this responsibility, taking your own child, just give it to your parents. How is that better?
And there's also the 3-generation household model where your parents move in. And this was common in Poland when when I was young, back in the People's Republic. It's common in Vietnam and China too. And
So it was a
because
normal
you're
thing for
cohabiting,
history, basically.
yeah, it's well, there's also the like 7-generation household where there's a lord and then like his wife, his 3 concubines, the secret wife that he keeps in his dungeon, his men-at-arms, his sons, his illegitimate sons, cousins. You know what I'm talking about. But yeah, the 3 generations was pretty normal. And you had a generational division of labor that helped facilitate things like childcare. This also happens if you have multiple households living together, but part of late capitalism is atomization, right? The incel variant is like the 0 generational household. It's one person alone at their computer without human connection. But the thing is that the market wants to replace every other source of support, every other source of goods, even meaning, but it cannot replace what we need from each other. The help, the support, the love, the care that really comes with having strong relationships, which aren't just based on what I'm getting, whether they reflect on what I want. And moving away from making that possible, again, like you said, would require much more than even Bernie was promising in terms of reorganizing our society.
I think the position of capitalism right now, and someone put the word up, is atomization. Basically, we want to destroy your capacity to have social structures. We want you living in your cubicle-like home, working 13 hours a day in front of your computer, being clocked by your digital,
That's a new thing. The face recognition and some
face recognition and all that stuff.
To work at home, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think COVID. I'm not trying to get conspiracy, but COVID provides an example of the capacity to maintain productivity in a socially atomized society.
I do want to ask you, Pascal, about something. I hope I'm not switching gears too hard. You had mentioned this on our personal text chat, that there's a character in the Black internet sphere that kind of preaches about, from a Jordan Peterson perspective, about this quote unquote crisis in masculinity.
Absolutely.
Kevin Samuels, I think is his name.
Kevin Samuels, yeah. I mean,
I'm not familiar with the dude. Marcus, are you familiar with Kevin Samuels?
No, I don't think so. No.
Are you familiar with Kirk Franklin?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Well, he marks himself as a men's rights activist, a Black men's rights activist, and his kind of whole position is that the modern woman, if you will, and her inability to decide what she wants, and the standards that she claims that she wants being outside of what she deserves, is causing the social dislocation of black families and the ability of black people to get married and have kids, and is the crux of the problems with the rise of single parent. Using statistics about only 1 in 4 of you get married, and it's a kind of gendered response, and this is very common in the black community. A very gendered response,
a kind of shaming, actually.
Yeah, shaming, a social dislocation of blaming for the social dislocation that exists in black society, largely amongst poor and working class black people, to the rise of the modern black woman, feminism, so on and so forth. But to be honest, he does interrogate and challenge men in their inability to reproduce, capital, jobs, get a job, make money, so on and so. But the critique I basically have about Karen Samuels is that he roots his solutions assuming that the normative standards of American capitalism are working in a way for black people that it worked for white people in 1950. And it's never worked that way for black people.
Yeah, I was going to say, like,
barely
worked. It worked that way
for white
today.
people in 1950.
Yeah,
right?
It's not even working for white people today that way.
There's like 1 million black men in jail at any point. I think that has a lot to do with social dislocation.
Yeah. So
I wanted to ask Pascal.
Women's fault.
My main critique of the Kevin Samuels project is that I think he's making a reactionary, when I mean reactionary in the classical sense, he's looking at this notion of glory days of the black family without realizing, the black family was together in 1949 because they were sharecroppers. You know what I'm saying? And you also had like a 53% rate of black poverty. You know what I'm saying? So,
and infant mortality, natal mortality
was out of control. So, I mean, I understand. Listen, as a middle-aged black male, I've seen these kind of reactionary discourses amongst large numbers of professionally educated black men. But my position is that I don't think it takes into consideration the way in which the nature of capitalism has changed in a way to not only make large numbers of black men and women, but particularly black men, redundant, but even large numbers of white men redundant in this current system. And the thing that's demonstrative of that is that when Moynihan wrote the Moynihan Report, warning about the fact that single-parent families in black communities was so bad that it would cause speciation. What does that mean? He literally was arguing that single-parent families were so bad that he was going to create another species, a different species of black
warlocks.
Yeah, wolves or warlocks. Or
wait,
whatever.
Who said they were going to be a different species? This Kevin Samuels guy said
No, Moynihan. This is Patrick.
Moynihan. I'm sorry.
Moynihan, right?
Well,
my God.
When Moynihan wrote that report,
is...
when he wrote that report, right, he was looking at the actual percentage of black out of wedlock birth. The rate of white out of wedlock birth today is the exact same number that Moynihan was saying when he wrote his report. So where is the fear and worry about white speciation?
Which I don't think
it is definitely there because there's a conservative the Hillbilly Chronicles, J.D. Vance's thing, Hillbilly Elegy. Or there's something called Black Rednecks and White Ghettos or something, which makes the same argument. And it's the bell curve people. I want to say Charles Taylor, but I can't remember if I'm getting the name right. And I think that when you look at, it's obvious that that race and moralism was the genesis of the Moynihan conclusion, right? That one, black people are already different, and two, they're making this terrible, morally unjustifiable single parent decision, and that's going to get them even further away from normalcy. But I think that what's missing is that when you de-invest in public education, when you de-invest in nutrition, when you reduce the opportunities for domestic travel, green space, recreation time for a huge segment of your population based on economic access and policy decisions, you really are creating a second society where people have biological differences. They're not fed as well, and they're not fed as well in childhood. This has developmental consequences in terms of the experiences they have as children. That also has developmental consequences, and over time, these things accumulate. Right? I'm not saying it's speciation, but the difficulty of finding a way to bridge the gap between like what one considers to be a sort of middle class worldly success and the opportunities and limitations that you have, the limited opportunities and the deficits that you have just going through the experience of childhood poverty in the United States. It goes from being a social and economic problem to something much more fundamental, and it deeply worries me.
I disagree with that. It's not becoming a genetic problem. It's a product of policy. It's a policy.
I agree with you. I'm not saying that it's a genetic problem. I'm saying that there are physical consequences to the policy.
Infant mortality, death, illness, disease, crime,
exactly,
murder, homicide.
Exactly exposure to lead in children. And all of this is differential, right? Like if you're rich enough, you can insulate your children from it.
But the problem
if you're
I have
poor
with
enough,
all of these,
you won't even be told about it.
The problem I have with these kind of reactionary conclusions is that it does not understand the role in which political economy causes these realities. Okay? First of all, it fails to realize that going back to the 19th century, the rate of Black single parenthood has been twice the rate of white going back to the 1900s. I always whenever I hear these reactionary Negroes talking about, oh, it was integration and it was the welfare that destroyed the Black family and blah, blah, blah. I said, have you ever read E. Franklin Frazier's studies of Black families in the 1930s? All of the social, pathological stuff you're talking about that happened in 1972, he was talking about in 1935. Out of word like birth, inability to replicate family structure. Even if you read The Philadelphia Negro by Du Bois in the 1890s, he talks about the submerged tenth. What ends up happening is that the only reason why those problems don't metastasize in the Jim Crow period, in the pre-integration period, is that Black people are redundant surplus labor, but because they're still needed at some form of labor, i.e. in the sharecropping plantation system, agrarian economies, and domestic labor, they haven't been completely relegated to total labor redundancy. What happens in the post-Jim Crow era is that because the need for sharecropping labor becomes obsolete due to mechanization, and you're now seeing Black people come into capitalism in the beginning of the 70s, what's happening to American capitalism during the early 70s? Deindustrialization, shift, the Nixon shock, all of this happens. Wages start to go down. The ability to have low-skill labor jobs in factories starts to dissipate. So you literally have a situation where you have men who are having jobs at least largely in an agrarian society or in domestic work as chauffeurs, as well as so on and so forth, are now entering into a capitalist society that's rendering all labor, particularly male labor, redundant. And at the same point, women are entering in the workforce in larger numbers. How is that not a recipe for social dislocation if you were already at the bottom of the economic paradigm before you got into that new economic model?
Well, this is something that's where, like, I'm thinking that there has to be an expectation for just some social upheaval, where if you start getting the mixtures between, I guess like where this show started of like these incels that can eventually lead to violence, but all these things, like these things are happening across the board, and you're getting actually some people in the reactionary right who are like getting a platform because they are, they start feeding into a lot of these, like just tendencies that tend to, you know, restrict other people's movement and or labor, and then propping up, you know, the white male as, you know, this arbiter of anything that's supposed to be happening in the United States. And so I think like you're already seeing a reaction to, like, as far as like immigration that I think is part of like the effects that's going on like within our labor force, but like expect that to get worse and like the treatment of immigrants, and also as like as far as like women in the workplace, like because this is an interesting thing of where there's a recognition of like, oh hey, this childcare is very expensive. How do we, you know, like what is the government do to going to help with like the childcare expenses and everything like that? But at the end of the day, you're going to have, yeah, you already do have these people who are saying, well, no, I should make enough money to have my wife and my child. It doesn't matter that I'm sitting alone, angry as fuck that I don't have those things and also can barely provide for myself, without a political education to rectify those things. And you know, we have a lot of guns in the society. So,
and I think that you're already seeing that violence. I mean, there was Kyle Rittenhouse. There was the car attack in Wisconsin. There was the year ago car attack in Toronto. And I think that all this pressure is already bubbling over in the United States, and it happens every day. The liberal hope, the sort of centrist liberal Biden new normal hope, is that all of it remains kind of anarchic one-offs, disorganized, without a program, and then it's manageable, right? Like every couple of weeks, there's another massacre for another reason, and hopes and prayers, that rinse, repeat. The conservatives want to organize against certain groups and direct that violence in a way that serves their political program, whether it's white nationalism, whether it's anti-immigrant, whether it's just a type of, you know, like get tough within the US on all forms of deviation. You know, maybe it'll be the gays, and there's always the hope on the left that class consciousness, together with the desperation, could lead to, you know, harnessing that energy in favor of a leftist program. But it's all up for grabs.
I want to read something.
How it'll play out.
If you guys indulge me, I want to read something because this is a very serious problem in terms of the way in which Black people put out. Frantz Fanon had a line. He said, "The oppressed will always." What's the line? He said, "The oppressed will always believe the worst about themselves."
Yeah.
You know, and one of the problems I have with this romance, you know, Adolf Reed calls it romancing Jim Crow, believing the whole, it was integration that destroyed it. We were wonderful back in the day. We had our own communities and blah, blah, blah. This nonsense that's totally divorced from the political reality and economy of Black life, right? And the whole this notion that like there wasn't crime in the Black community until it was, we got into integrated neighborhoods in the cities. This is a Black sociologist. His name is Charles S. Johnson. This is a statement he made in 1923 during the golden days of segregation. 1923. There are three cardinal beliefs that may be said to control in one form or another most of the thinking about Negroes. First, that they are mentally inferior. Second, that they are immoral. And third, that they are criminal. This is Charles Johnson in 1923. So what was he seeing in 1923 that made him think that we were going through some kind of wonderful renaissance in Black life? I suggest people read a book called The Condemnation of Blackness by a man named Khalil G. Muhammad, who was a historian. And it talks about how literally in the early 20th century, Black people in the urban environments during the Great Migration were reduced to criminality, and how the Black elite functioned to deny them social services under the belief that their innate criminality rendered them impossible to be reformed.
And what strikes me too is that that narrative, those three condemnations, right? Inherently inferior, amoral, and criminal. They are the classic trifecta of accusations made by every dominant group against anyone that they're
You could write it right now,
over
couldn't
at
you?
the moment. You find that's what they said about the Irish. That's what Germans said about Slavs. That's what Russians say about people from the Caucasus. And I don't mean to minimize the situation in America, but it's a universal mechanism of repression and of shifting the any responsibility from people who are in a position to make policy, to redistribute resources, to make decisions that affect people on a social level, to wash their hands clean and say that those people just brought this on themselves, they deserve it, and we can go to bed at night safe and sound, just worried that one of those criminal, immoral, inferior types is going to like break in and rape us. That's all we have to fear.
I was going to ask, in this context, and we've kind of discussed kind of this sort of thing, but you didn't really discuss much what the contemporary situation is. So we're talking about kind of a crisis in masculinity. And I think the crisis in Black masculinity, obviously Marcus and Jason can also talk about this, in the United States is similar, but also distinct from the situation of the crisis.
I think, and Jason and I, we talk about this all the time, is that I think that there, for various factors about the way in which, frankly, with the confluence of race and racism and sexual and the history, and this is a real history, the history in which patriarchal American capitalism has tended to render not only Black people, but Black men to otherization. Because if we understand that part of the consequences of Western capitalism is gendered, yes, it's a patriarchal capitalist economic model. And just the sheer logic of that reality, when you're a dominant economic force as a quote unquote constructed race, the key word is constructed race, the logical position you're going to take is that you want to neutralize the threat from the out minority group. You want, in other words, if you're running a capitalist masculinist project, you do want to neutralize that's premised on a constructive notion of race. You want to make sure you neutralize any men who will be perceived as a more logical threat that do not meet the constructive racial standards that you set up, i.e., if you're setting up a white male patriarchal notion of capitalism, Black, brown, and other males have to be made sure that they do not challenge that hierarchical structure. So this is not, I'm not making an argument that Black men suffer more than Black women, or what I'm saying is that there are specific ways that are different and horrible to the way in which Western capitalism deals with Black and brown people in different contexts. It's not about competing and say, oh, Black men have it worse, Black women have it worse. What I'm saying is that they are persecuted and exploited in these systems in different ways that are both horrible. And the problem that we have right now in the discourse, and particularly in online spaces, is that there's an oppression Olympics going on between Black men and Black women, between Black men have it worse by far. No, Black women, and I find it ridiculous.
Yeah, it reminds me of there is a kind of like private conversation I had when I was a student. We were at maybe Estonia or Finland or Sweden, one of these very, very progressive countries, and that person was a very high-ranking official in the government, and he was talking about the struggle he sees in the current kind of like government or politically. It is that the traditional, the nationalists, the traditionalist nationalists, and the supremacist, white supremacists, chauvinists, they're all unified based on this tradition, whereas the progressives, the environmentalists, the feminists, the like gender equality persons, the kind of like those fighting against social like racism. All of these are kind of fighting for themselves. It's very hard for them to unify because whenever they have a vision, the other side, the mostly the right wing, would always refer to this glorious past, that it was so great. But then this great glorious past is based on deploitation and basically kind of like talking shit about the those that they used to exploit, like women, like people of color. They just demonize them, and then say that we have the glorious past where the white male govern everything. That was great. Why are you trying to break that? So, and that kind of things create division. So that's why we have within each racial group there will be a men, feminists, and men like fighting over gender issues, environmentalists. It's scattered.
And I think that part of the problem, I think the only remedy to this scattering of focus that you mentioned so eloquently, Summer, is that, what you're saying, it makes sense, is that the right wing, they coalesce around reactionary thought. The good old days when white men controlled 60% of the corporate jobs and the women were at home and the Negroes were on the plantation were the good old days. Why can't we just go back? While trapping everyone else to believe that they were good old days in the first place when they were not. And what's coming on the left is like, I suffered more. I've been triggered horrible from this. And the reason that is because the liberals who dictate the discourse of the left do not want to root the problems of society in capitalist political economy at all. And the only way to address this is to address this in the terms of political economy, and they don't want to do this. Neither flank, the right or the left, want to do that because they realize it would unify the classes of people who are most suffering from this paradigm.
I think your Newsweek article was great at pointing out that the shift from demands being made for like material needs and redistribution, shifting to recognition being the beginning and the end of the Black leadership political project. Also, it feels very cheap from the liberal side because it doesn't involve redistributing economic power, but and it feels very easy because we're talking about symbolic politics, but then it fosters that very oppression Olympics. Because if
everybody wants to be recognized for their pain.
Exactly. And why is somebody getting recognized more than me?
I appreciate it. Thanks for that recognition.
My pain is the greatest and the strongest. I should get like a year.
And I think that's like where like the fundamental issue comes into it. And like then really the some that we've talked about before is like with kind of like the disjointed left, there is no mechanism or organization that's able to effectively address even like the concerns, let alone the material conditions that come from any of the issues that we've, kind of talked about today, whether it is, the incel, groups that can eventually lead to, some dangerous acts, or just reactionary right-wing, shit that can lead to dangerous acts, like that. I mean, hell, like we're coming up almost a year from that Tennessee, the guy that blew up he exploded his RV in Tennessee. And I mean, I think the most I could square out of that was that he thought it was like the 5G AT&T, was going to, I don't know, turn the frogs gay or something. I'm not, but at the end of the day, there's like people are getting more and more fed up with the, just absolute like hellscape that capitalism is creating.
It's hard out there.
And what's up?
It's hard out there.
Yeah, yeah, and it's getting harder. And the things that I think it's going to be it's going to be more and more frustrating for people, even if there's like this new like build back better agenda. If people start selling it as like, no, these are all the fixes that the society needs, and then like it's not even close, it's just going to make people angrier and more likely to seek out answers that don't actually solve any of the issues.
I mean, the thing is, though, what's even worse about this political moment, right, is that both sides are focusing on utter bullcrap to intentionally avoid talking about the way the material economic conditions contribute to the program, to the problem. So you have the liberals who will dispatch of wokeness to keep people navel gazing and fart sniffing their pain. And you'll have the conservatives complain about the wokeness, saying they just want to make white people the evil people who cause all the harm in the world. And that's why we got to go back to the good old days to protect ourselves, without realizing that neither side gives a damn about the majority of their constituents, except the donor class that's lining their pockets. It's a tragic smokescreen and canard and con game that's being played on black people, white people, brown people, Latino people, Asian people, all people, while in a small cadre of elite across the board are getting paid, serving the interests of capital, and everyone is facing increased precarity, moving down the train to get ground to dust. And the Omicron variant is coming.
And this is part of the issue, and like is that the entire structure, especially within the Democratic Party, is only, it's geared to deal with issues on these individual grievance, and like literally like you need to be the loudest people in the room to get any awareness and or patronage for any issue. And like whether it's any type of issues regarding the black community, which have like wholesale just been like thrown away just down to like relegating to like voting rights and criminal justice reform.
Mm-hmm. Don't forget reparations.
Yeah, of course, reparations, but they're
throwing them off.
But this is the thing, is like this is the only way that the apparatus even deals with any problems, right? It's like if you want to deal with environmental stuff, okay, well, Sierra Club was the old guard, and now you got Sunrise Movement, some of the new people coming in. Oh, we're dealing with black issues. Oh, okay, well, it used to be, some of these, well, I think now largely is like the black fraternities and sorority groups, their alumni groups. But then also too, it's like you got people, recognizing, Black Lives Matter is now this force that we have to deal with only on this individual efforts. But like none of these issues can bleed in together. None of the problems can ever be, whole. And that's where, I get to the lack of an organization to say, no, these problems are actually connected. We can point to a source and actually not just, kind of like blurt it out, but there needs to be an explanation. And the thing that's like frustrating is that people look for easy solutions, right? Like human beings are inherently lazy. So if someone says like, no, the reason why you are feeling this pain is because women just are working too much, and that's the fucking problem. Well, if someone says, well, it's not me, I'm fine, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
I shower, I put on the Axe body spray, I look up jokes online to tell people at the bar. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing. What's wrong with women these days?
That's what I call my friends constantly and ask them what my problem is. And they say, you move to a country where you don't speak the language and you're shut in. And I go like, oh, that's what it is.
So it's Jason, their problem for not speaking English. The problem is that
there's only one of you to go around. It's not your problem. It's the problem of the women of the world.
Behind the show insights, Jason didn't shower today.
I did. My water has been shut off since midnight, and I've been panicking about it. Asked Djene Bajalan. I was panicked, and he was laughing at me.
So the patron only stream is just going to be Jason showering.
Wow.
It's gonna be a beach episode with that sea behind him.
Yeah, exactly.
Fucking
the entire
Stefan was
Pacific
like,
is your
"There's an
bathtub."
ocean behind you. Go shower there."
Oh,
I was like, "Fuck you, Stefan." It's salt water, and I'm shy, and it's cold outside. And your balls shrivel. So, how am I gonna unincel myself with these shriveled nuts as I'm parading around the beach, gallivanting like a unicorn in heat?
See, I think the thing is that
imagery is too much, brother.
There's somebody out there that wants
You've
that.
traumatized Pascal.
There's somebody out there that's gonna see the taco meat glistening in the salt water.
Glistening taco meat.
If you guys could see how the sun is shimmying off the fucking water, that would be it's shimmying off the taco meat right now.
Yes.
It would be a beautiful scene.
I don't know, dude. Maybe I feel like we've digressed. I don't think we've digressed. I think we've kind of expanded the discourse. Maybe to talk about.
I think some people are going to be upset that we ended up talking about black pill economy again, because that's what this show's a lot of. But it was all very good, and obviously it's good to talk about that because Pascal knows so much about it that you get a real education.
I did want to kind of address this question that somebody Jojo
Djene?
Thank you, Pascal. And I'd apologize if I'm saying your name wrong, Jojo. Why does the left feed into the terminology and framing a narrative build right instead of challenging and explaining why it's so disingenuous? I find this an interesting question because what the right does, in my opinion, is really oversimplify big time problems. And I think that's something that is being said over and over and over again in the conversations that Kuba and Pascal are having. And that oversimplification to me doesn't stop with the right. A lot of the online left is adopting similar methods of trying to oversimplify some of these problems. So building instead of challenging and explaining why it's disingenuous. I mean, we do that constantly on this show, at least we try to. And I think we're trying to have that conversation right now. Pascal, do you want to expand that?
I think it's an interesting question. I think it's a good question. I'll be very honest, and I think Jason will agree with me. Is that coming to this understanding of things when you grow up in capitalist realism and you go to university and you get a job or you have your own practice or you make money or you whatever. Or even if you don't do that, you just have a working class job and you don't have the time, it doesn't come naturally. You have to really read and understand and see a view of history outside of the civil rights movement was wonderful. And we had Dr. King and Malcolm X, and everything was great. And then we had the feminist movement, and it was all like it's effective to not teach American history. And I'm not talking about the old, all the white people were evil and all the brown people were the victims narrative. I'm talking about a class political economy based history of America in a way rooted in people that were trying to create politics. Like when we had the show on Hubert Harrison, the fact that Hubert Harrison was frustrated with the Socialist Party, even though he supported Debs, but he never abandoned socialism. And the rationale is why he might have supported the Bolsheviks, but didn't, totally go into the Communist Party, and why he still maintained a certain kind of racial politics in 17, 18, 20, 21. I can kind of understand, why that makes sense. That doesn't necessarily mean that because X person did it in 1924, that it works today. That's another problem with the way in which we look at history. It's like, well, Eugene Debs did, Marx said, and Engels did. Learn from those analyses, help them integrate yours. But
let's get the Paris Commune right this time.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that the current moment has to be fixed in that history.
Yeah.
But to answer the question, I wanted to say that I think that we have to really not only do political education to others, we've got to politically educate ourselves. If we're going to be content creators on the left, we got to read. Jason and I do a lot of reading, whether it's books,
They do.
whether it's articles.
Make me
You know what I'm
read.
saying?
Make
I'm
me
reading.
Yeah, I mean,
on
too
my
much reading
iPad, I got
according to
books
their
all over my, you know.
case handlers.
You know what's funny? You know what's funny? I'm gonna out Marcus on this. So Marcus, for the Saturday show, we give him the readings too, and he was like, "I gotta read this." So I remember the first time we're like, "Hey, here's the book for Saturday." He's like, "I gotta read this whole thing," and Marcus like reads all the books. So we have to throw Marcus into the mix now, as well as the guy that has to read the books, because for the last few Saturdays, it's been authors. And you know,
I'm gonna do the reading.
I mean, this Saturday was like a 1,500 like Google document written by me.
Yeah. Today,
loving life. I was loving life.
yeah, I fucking zip through that shit on my phone. I was like, "Phew, easy day." Thank you.
But the thing is, though, right? When you read all that stuff, we can't go to working class people and say, okay, you got to read all these books so you can get liberated from your exploitation. No, now that we are the one creating content, it's our job to take these theories, ideas, concepts, and thoughts and make them understandable, palatable. You know, Jason and I can
for
go on
different
a
audiences
show
too.
for different audiences, and we can do we can explain how black politics works in 3 minutes.
Your Newsweek article was great in that you could have an old white person read it, they would get the point, and they wouldn't be triggered, which is it's not an easy thing to do, especially in this climate. And I wanted to build off of something that Pascal was saying about how people are indoctrinated to think about the economy and to think about their own experience in the United States. The United States, at its basis, has a just world vision of history, meaning that good people get rewarded. If you work hard, you succeed, and bad people are punished. And if you aren't being rewarded, but instead you're being punished, then think to yourself, sinner, wretched one, what you did wrong, because we all know from earlier in this sentence that the world is good, hard work is rewarded.
Meritocracy.
Exactly. Meritocracy, just desserts, this kind of thing. And the civil rights message and the gay rights message and all of these liberatory moments back to the Civil War and back to the American Revolution are ways that you can sort of retroactively identify something that wasn't perfect, but that was when it was overcome.
Kuba says you're speaking some good stuff here. And I want to ask you a question, like, seriously, right? You hear the right. Now, Jason, I want you to chime in. They always talk about the way they like, oh, the left, and it's the left, it's the left. How come no one says, okay, what would America be like today if there had never been a left? Take the left out of American history. Where are we living in America?
South Africa.
Ooh.
It's hard to imagine.
We're also living, by the way, with child labor.
Yes.
Yeah.
No weekends off.
Weekend? What's a weekend?
What is a
weekend?
Yeah,
there's the Sabbath where you get yelled at by a priest.
I think without the left, it would just be me and Cuba talking to each other.
Yeah, being like, oh my God, it's wonderful here, isn't it? Good day to you, neighbor.
It's a little bit like India with the caste system.
The framing, I was watching. I don't remember what I was watching something last night, and I was watching some right-wing reactionary. What's his name? Who's the old guy that has the channel? Prager.
Oh
yeah.
Prager was going on about the left this, the left that, and I do find it interesting how right wing frames all their problems on the quote unquote left, and that's what the problem is. These aren't even real issues, and we've been kind of talking about on the show, especially when it comes down to things like the idea of critical race theory, because it's not so much actual critical race theory; it is the idea of it that is so frightening. And then that's when they get on the attack. And someone said it in the chat, I think it was LME, that said, you can't just fight right-wing ideology by trying to debunk it. You first have to prove to people why it's inaccurate and why you're right. Because if I sprout off a million things that are wrong, where do you start?
And
Yeah.
the thing is that if you can be as wrong as you want, if it fits into into a narrative that people recognize. And
never concede the facts to the right in a debate, because they lie about them or manufacture them or spin them all the time.
Like there's a reason. There's a reason why. Let me just say this, Kuba, and I'll go off air. I'll go off air. There's a reason why I wanted to do a sports show with Marcus, and we were having a conversation, me, Marcus, and the other guy that's going to be a co-host, a gentleman named Mac. And I said, I was listening on my drive down here. My phone was dead, so I couldn't listen to the same 5 albums I've been listening to for the last 25 years. And I listened to AM sports talk radio, something that I no longer like because it is so reactionary. And the gentleman that was speaking, I think his name was Colin Cowherd, and he spoke for 3 hours. So think about this for a second. There is millions of Americans that listen to sports media, and it is filled with reactionary right-wing takes, racist takes. It was fascinating for me to listen for 3 fucking hours. This guy had a block of time for 3 hours just saying the most outlandish, pro-capitalist, racist bullshit. And I was talking to Marcus about it, and I was like, we need to have a show where we're not just constantly talking about certain issues like, oh, why a stadium in your area is probably a bad idea, but just talking sports from a non-right-wing perspective is so important, because the conversation is dominated by that reactionary tone. So by the time we start talking about real things like your children's schooling, don't think that the critical race theory fight is just all old white people in Florida. It is a multiracial conversation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about this. And if you need anybody to discuss whist or European handball, or if you've got like some highlight championship games you'd like some commentary on, then I'm your man.
No,
I think that there might be some American sports formats as well that I've read about.
Not familiar with them.
But one thing that I wanted to tie back to is I think that just world image that Americans are taught from birth, which really puts all of the pressure on them to succeed. And if anything is wrong, it's your fault, because God is good, the world is fair, and capitalism works. You need to challenge that, right? Like there needs to be some way to erode that. In Summer and I were talking about the difference between kind of like the misery of Confucian exploitation in East Asia versus the misery of people's republics in Eastern Europe. And people were suffering in both cases. Lots of hierarchy, lots of brutality, lots of abuse. The Confucian version still had this ghost of the just world, where I've done everything right. I've looked after my parents. I've looked after my family. I did well in school, but I'm still suffering. I'm still the victim of injustice. People are still with power. They're still treating me badly. The Slavic mentality, Poland, in Czechoslovakia, in Russia, is I did everything well. I'm a good son. I looked after my parents. I looked after my my siblings. I did well in school. I'm kind when I have an opportunity to help strangers. Of course I'm suffering, right? Because that's what happens, right? You're an idiot if you expect any kind of like, yeah. And the pain is real, but it isn't attached to a grievance because there's the idea that like this isn't normal, and therefore I'm doing something wrong. Therefore the problem is me. At least doesn't exist. So you don't torture yourself because others are torturing you on top of what you're experiencing. And I think that if there's ways to nudge people from a perspective that like, of course your life is shitty. You know, this is late capitalism. And if we don't blame yourself, don't take it personally, and let's do something about it, might be a more constructive starting point than trying to reorient, create a story in which you still live in a fundamentally just world. It's just longer arcs of redemption, or
around you.
Yeah, or you know, there's that Obama retweeting Martin Luther King about the arc of history being long, but it bends towards justice. It's like I never saw the bend, right? Like I think it bends left, but I don't know if that's towards justice or, you know, towards Cleveland.
They love to mispurpose the uses of Martin Luther King, boy.
Yeah, I think it's like the most times you're gonna hear Martin Luther King quote is after a white dude said something fucked up.
Back off, man. He said
but like not fucked up in the fun Kuba way.
I love when right wingers on Martin Luther King's birthday always say a Martin Luther King quote. That's like my favorite.
Yeah, you see that like the FBI did a post one day.
Oh yeah, it's like you killed him.
Yeah,
Come on.
I was like you did this.
It's like it's amazing. The people who, if they were alive, would have fought the civil rights movement the most are the ones who want to claim its legacy the greatest today.
Yeah. I mean, some of them like were alive to fight the civil rights era, and they were actively doing it, and now they'll still throw out these quotes.
I'm surprised that the FBI isn't like saying if Martin Luther King were alive today, he'd totally be snitching for us.
That's fucking hilarious. Someone said liberals hated MLK in 67. Motherfuckers hated MLK once he was like, and I'm against this unjust war.
Which, you know, and that's where like, I don't know if this is a different type of black pilled, but like we just need a good draft. There's just too many fucking dumb dudes running around. Just have a war, have a draft, go off and die.
Kill like 20% of them, and we wouldn't really have a problem.
Yeah, we got to make the Thanos snap happen. It's not just gonna happen.
No, draft them for like an endless game of Call of Duty.
Oh yeah, Squid Game. Yeah, he's been drafted for Squid Game.
Yeah,
damn.
Very important.
Funniest, meanest comment ever. This is. MLK was assassinated so Gloria Steinem could soar. Oh my god.
She was a CIA asset too.
Oh my god. I don't think a lot of people know that though.
There's a YouTube of her admitting it.
There's more.
Really?
Oh, actually, live.
She admitted, like, what did she say? I've read about her being a CIA asset, but I've never seen her admit it.
There's a YouTube of her admitting it in black and white.
What does she say?
She says, she talks about how during it when she was in India or something like that. I'm going to look for it. Gloria Steinem, CIA.
To be fair, like in those days, you got a CIA application form in the seat back pocket on your Pan Am flight. Basically, every American going abroad could expect could expect to like be approached to debrief, because it's like, so India, is it hot? Right? Did you meet any Indians in India?
It's like, good afternoon,
Yeah.
fellow patriot. Would you like a daily stipend to go along with this vacation?
I just put the video in the chat.
I see it. I'm pulling it up right now. I hope it's not long.
3 minutes.
We would like you to visit this factory on your trip. And half the time, the intelligence would be so bad that you showed up, and it's like, well, you know,
Dusty,
the
I don't
city
believe-
that you told me to go to wasn't a village, and the factory was a graveyard, and the like person that I was supposed to meet has been dead for 7 years. So
Someone
apart
said
from
something
all
that I
of
want to
that-
address. It said Louis Armstrong was a CIA asset. That's actually incorrect. Louis Armstrong was sent based on something that was called jazz diplomacy by the State Department on a propaganda mission to third world and developing countries during the Cold War. He was not a CIA asset, but he was used in Kenya during the assassination. Excuse me, in the Congo during the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, and they used him to entertain the Katanga province, which is where the area in which Lumumba was, the assassins were sent, and he was used kind of as a distraction, unbeknownst to him, according to the record. So he was used by the State Department, but he was not. I would not go as far to say Louis Armstrong was a CIA asset.
There are a lot of people who didn't know they were being used because until the Church Commission, the United States was just rife with CIA front organizations.
Yeah.
I mean, the Pentagon armed me and Marcus, so they can't be that bad.
Yeah.
I mean, their checks cash. I can tell you that.
They do.
Oh my God.
They do.
Hey,
oh my God.
Pascal is realizing he's the only person who hasn't worked for the American military-industrial complex, directly or indirectly. CSIS.
That's not. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Okay, you guys can see also my video choices, which are
Yeah.
fun. Let me get this bigger so you can't see what I watch when you guys aren't looking.
Dancing nice girl, sexy.
At the festival, you worked for the Independent Research Service.
That's right.
Well, exactly when did your own association with the CIA start, and in what fashion? Did they come to you, or did you go to them?
In 1958, when I came home from India, I discussed with student leaders, past and present, many of them active with the National Student Association, this kind of small foundation to encourage Americans to go. They thought it was a good idea, too. I was then told by foundations and professors and friends that I should not do this, that I would get in trouble with the House Un-American Activities Committee, the American Legion, all of those 50s people. And I became convinced that it was impossible. It was at that point that the student leaders said to me that they had in the past received funds for international programs from the CIA, and that they felt that this was important and could also be partly funded by the CIA.
Well, I mean, did you feel that you really tried? I mean, did you go around to all of the wealthy private foundations, wealthy private people, and explain your point of view, and explain why you felt it was important that the United States be represented at these things in a certain way? What did they tell you?
They told me that, well, the Ford Foundation, for instance, told me that they thought we were too liberal and too controversial, and that we would endanger their cultural programs in Austria. The first festival was being held in Vienna. It was not encouraging at all. And the private individuals to whom I went often had particular points of view forward, which would have been much, much more restricting than the CIA funds were, which were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
What do you mean they were free? You mean to say it was easier for you to work for the CIA than a private organization?
That's right. And the reason I think that comes as a surprise, as it did to me at the time. I mean, I had the conventional liberals' view of the CIA as a right-wing incendiary group. And I was amazed to discover that this was far from the case, that they were enlightened, liberal, nonpartisan activists of the sort who characterized the Kennedy administration, for instance.
You have not been working now for the CIA since 1960.
Stefan can't even hold in his laughter. Stefan can't hold
What's funny? What's funny? CIA is a nice, woke place.
How did you guys not know about this? You guys
Enlightened.
haven't heard of this before?
She
I've
said
never
that
heard this.
it's like the 1968 equivalent of saying they're like intersectional.
Yes.
Yeah,
Which-
exactly.
Where's
Full
the
circle.
lie?
The
Stefan,
CIA
where's
has
the lie?
been woker than you know for a long time.
I mean, yeah, obviously the
Yeah,
CIA is
I
like
mean,
the
honestly-
liberal bit of the security state, but to see it just said like that's quite interesting.
Yeah, honestly, the real victim of Reaganism was all of those good, nice liberals in the CIA
Yeah.
that had to like
Mm.
deal with that intolerance. You know, words can be violence.
Mm-hmm.
But then they
And
got their
every
man
day hearing
Obama,
that from
and
your boss. Exactly,
think-
they got
yeah.
Obama, but then they get Trump. You know, you really have to feel for them.
Little known fact.
Maybe
that-
they deserve like a day of recognition.
they need like
with just a
The
little
thing
more
that's funny
funding,
though, right? Is that when the CIA starts, it comes out of the OSS, I think in World War II, and it starts. It's the province of like very like waspy, blue blood, Ivy League, Yale boys, like you know, like
she had a British accent.
my ancestors came
Yeah,
over.
the
on,
transatlantic accent.
Transatlantic.
More British than British.
my ancestors came over was on the Mayflower flower, right? And then in like 2019, I have a friend of mine who's going to freaking FIU, and there's a flyer on the wall for CIA recruitment. I'm like, Jesus, how times have changed. I was like, Florida International University,
yeah.
and now they actually talk about come check out the CIA. I was like, oh
I
my
mean,
Oh.
isn't the head of
There's
the CIA
CIA
black at the
booth
moment?
every time in my school.
Yeah,
Someone said yes,
and,
Well, I mean DC.
in DC.
and
Yeah, because my school is literally blocks away from it's from State Department.
lots of
two-
international students.
Maybe 2 blocks away from State Department and maybe 10 blocks away from White House. Lots of international school. It's kind of like diplomat, professional school, and of course, it's in my school. You're fancy if you get into State Department, and the CIA booth is right there every time you go to any career fair, and there will be people line up and ask about. I think it also has a FBI booth. I never seen an NSA booth.
No, you need to be the NSA needs like U.S. citizens, and they prefer military and ex-military.
It's
But
cool that, like the US has
think-
like 27 intelligence agencies. Like you have like the
Oh,
the
yeah.
Coast Guard intelligence agency.
yes, and those are the ones that they admit to, right?
Yeah.
But I think that part of it had to do with the fact that the CIA at the beginning was actually a small group of people in an America where that WASP power elite was still a portion, like a segment of the overall society. Now those WASP families have either gotten promoted into the billionaire exospace, have intermarried and become diverse, or just died off in a lot of cases. So the pool of people that you're drawing from needs to be different, while at the same time you have the swelling of the security bureaucracy and more seats to fill. And I think they're making a very smart bet that if you need PMC types in the future, which you will, because these are educated positions, you need to have, everybody needs to have gone to Brown or something, and everyone needs to speak a language and not be embarrassing. Then you need to foster this kind of cultural wokeism, just to ensure that you can keep the pipeline flowing.
But they
Yeah,
all
it's
have
funny that-
anxiety now too.
She mentions the Ford Foundation. I have a good book. It's over there. It's not near me, but it's about the Ford Foundation and Black Power. It's called Top Down. Top Down. I think it's written by a woman named Ferguson. I forgot her name. and it talks about how the Ford Foundation under George Bundy was like a serious reactionary right-wing guy, literally is supporting Black power and Black nationalism in the 60s and in the 70s as a means of kind of social control of like Black political militancy. So they're funding all these things, like these theoretical groups, these race first kind of programs. Now, if you read Robert Allen's book on Black awakening in capitalist America, he talks about how in the 60s the Ford Foundation starts to infiltrate into the kind of Black power and civil rights movement and finance these kind of quote unquote radical movements. And it's really fascinating. One of the things that I haven't seen a comprehensive one yet, but the role of, and because she talks about the foundations, the role, and I'm sure Cuba knows about this because he's deep state, the role of foundations, right, of shaping the left and the right. Foundations, think tanks, which usually come out of foundations, goes back to the 19th century, and the way of using capitalist wealth and power to socially control and social engineer the left is so freaking old, man.
In fact, the whole idea of post-war social democracy in places like the UK, Germany, France, where you had state funding for the BBC, open universities, these types of moves, and more of that policy function brought into the state rather than, they called some of these early think tanks were like the Citizens Committee or like Concerned Citizens, and it's like 3 Rockefellers. That was a reaction against this private apparatus that was generated to fill those functions in places like the United States and in the UK. The people on the left correctly recognized that this was an better have these functions under democratic control, where if you win an election, you'll be able to redirect the money, and if you don't win an election, you'll still have some public resources to draw on for things like policy making and research. That was better than pretending to an anarchist, minimal, unintrusive state, which means that private corporations, great families, private sources of power can create these paragovernmental apparatus.
No, I mean, it's fascinating. By the way, the title of the book, I'll get the link, is Top Down: The Ford Foundation, Black Power, and the Reinvention of Racial Liberalism, Politics and Culture in Modern America by Karen Ferguson. She's written some articles for Jacobin, too. Top Down by Karen Ferguson. Great book on the Ford Foundation's infiltration into the Black Power movement. Really interesting and fascinating stuff.
Well, on that note, we've been talking for entirely too long, because sometimes these episodes take me 4 hours to upload, and partially because of my internet here in this very underdeveloped part of the state I chose to live in.
Man, get yourself a fucking Mexican phone. What are you doing?
It's a whole nother thing. They
literally. You guys heard the story about how Pentagon-backed militias and CIA-backed militias were fighting in Syria, right?
Yeah.
By Pentagon-backed militias,
guys.
They meant me. They meant the FBK.
That first episode you were on talking about the uniforms you got.
Oh yeah. There's like an itemized list of exactly what we got from the Pentagon. Mostly
So were
bullets.
they thinking of it as like an Army-Navy football game, or what exactly?
Well, no, it was
Like,
it
who
was just
scored
the
the most
CIA was
touchdowns
focused
in that
on
battle?
overthrowing Assad while the Pentagon was focused on fighting ISIS, and so the CIA just found the most psycho jihadists they could find because obviously they're better at fighting.
The moderate terrorists.
Yeah. While the Pentagon initially gave it to like FSA guys, but they were just kind of criminals and weren't very good at fighting. And then the CIA ones became ISIS, and
Yeah, so you scored the winning field goal, though, right? That's the important part.
Yeah, it was another win for the Pentagon. The CIA thing was we beat ISIS, they didn't get Assad, so yeah, we won the game.
You guys are horrible.
Well,
Well,
you're the one who wants to talk about sports.
Yeah.
On Sundays, Kuba, Sundays at 12 p.m. Eastern to 1 p.m. Eastern.
Well, and I think the good thing is, though, the CIA and the Pentagon are getting more money than they ever have. And so, you know, let's look forward to the next game.
Not 1% of that to the Epigay, so it's based.
Yeah. So, yeah, looking forward to the next game and see how each side will fare. It'll be good.
Anybody want to give me odds on the CIA this time?
Well, they got to win one eventually.
Do they?
Yeah, exactly.
Are they the Washington Generals of?
I mean,
military coup.
That was a disappointment. It was a wash.
The CIA fucking football game with the FBI. That's the one I really want to see. The fucking pickup basketball game between the CIA and the FBI.
Do they not do that in the US? Like here, like regiments and stuff, and all these kind of institutions do actually play sports with each other. Do you not actually do it in the US?
Oh well, yeah.
I mean,
No, that's a thing. And
the military organizations actually play against each other.
Yeah.
There's a cup.
The academies.
The academies.
And even like, within the military, like they're like bases, especially like bigger bases, will have like sports teams. But then also too, don't forget that the congressional baseball game where was it, Gabby Gifford got shot. That was like a while ago.
I mean, it must just be like an over 60s game now.
Oh yeah. It's largely like a geriatrics game with like Dan Crenshaw, which he can't really hit it that well anyway. So.
That's fucked up because he's got one.
Yeah, I got him.
Hey, some people, we really are doing a sports show. I would say about 2 weeks. The sports show should be starting. I do have a topic I wanted to throw off Marcus and Mac about Dan Marino never winning a Super Bowl and what role cocaine played in the cocaine wars played in Miami never winning a Super Bowl in the 80s. I had this thought in my head, and I started doing more research on all these Dolphin players that were getting popped for fucking blow. And I was like, God. I wonder if we sat and like actually thought it out. What role did cocaine play in Dan Marino's inability to win a Super Bowl in the 80s? And I bet
it took to Maradona's career.
Right? I really think that there is a line between the cocaine wars that were going on in the late 70s through the first part of the 80s in Miami and how that affected some of those players. And
I think there was a fucking episode of Chapo Trap House about this, where some guy came to talk about his book, and this was like the thing they were talking about.
Really?
Yeah. Like I can't fucking remember exactly. Maybe someone in chat know, but there was something they had where they talked about sports and they talked about cocaine in the 80s. But I can't remember what it was.
Well, there was a lot of cocaine in the 80s in general, but Miami.
Yeah, there was heart attacks too.
Yeah.
Like a lot of guys were dying of enlarged hearts. I think it was NBA players. But
six, which was a big that's kind of a for sports. That's a huge moment because Lynn Bias was a number 1 overall draft pick that was projected to kind of be the savior of an aging Boston Celtics team, and he had a freakish death to cocaine it was first rumored that it was crack cocaine, but it was cocaine that he was snorting at a.
Oh, that's fine then.
Yeah. The good people drugs. And
List 514 Cocaine Nights featuring Adam McKay. Adam McKay.
Oh, Adam McKay, the writer.
The director, yeah.
Director, yeah. I would like to know. I would like to do a little more research. But if you look at some of the players, I was actually thinking about some of the players on that team that he had, and the fact that he couldn't really get the same sort of foundational grounding that someone like Joe Montana had, with his players staying for as long as they stayed. Marino, if you go back and look at his career, he never had people for as long. Especially standout players. And my thought process, I was like, what happened?
I'd find it. I think this is like actually what what you're kind of describing is like, I think why teams like Utah, TCU are able to even like, sometimes be competitive against like these bigger teams, is because like when you look across the board, like at their starting line, it's like seniors all across who've been like playing with each other for years, and that makes a difference. So yeah, if you can't do that because people are coked out and not being able to stick around, that
it was
institutional
really
knowledge.
There's a difference between a dude that's doing some blow before and after the game, like the Dallas Cowboys guys that had the White House, so to speak, where they were doing all that crazy debaucherous bullshit. And there's stories that the drug dealers tell of the Dolphins in their house on game day buying blow. And they're not
on game day.
Ball. I'm an NFL player and I want the fucking full brick. Like, let's get fucked up.
The Adam McKay thing, it's called Death of the Wing, and uses a series of deaths among NBA players in the 80s as a lens to discuss the Reagan Revolution, the war on drugs, and America's shifting social and political landscape during the era. So maybe you could listen to that. It sounds like kind of on the same area.
That would be let's examine that and look at the failures of Marino and blame it just on drugs and not on coaching. And Reagan, yeah, drugs and Reagan.
And the CIA, of course, you can always bring it back to them.
It was the CIA that didn't want Marino to win a Super Bowl. That's really what it boils down to.
It's amongst other like running drugs and selling weapons for like death squads, they're also making sports bets. So
yeah, that was I mean, to be honest, they probably would have made more money like fixing sports than they did like selling crack.
Have you ever seen the betting lines? Some of those games. Well, like I said, we've talked long enough that we've gone into crazy conspiracy theories about the CIA.
Yeah, CIA sports
creating the bridge for tomorrow's sports game, sports show.
No, it's not going to start for like 2 weeks. We have to. We want to be like ready.
Is there like a sport shortage right now in the United States? Have they tapped out the strategic sport reserve?
The sport gap is growing.
All I know, Kuba, is that there's a channel on this TV that I have where I can actually watch an NFL game in English. But I have been watching them in Spanish.
Please tell me that it's an English language commentator, but it's actually a Mexican guy who really doesn't care. And he's like, yeah, so they're forming the lines again, and they'll be like,
he doesn't know the rules
for a little while. Yeah, like
so someone asked this question,
and of course they are down again.
So someone asked this question, and they don't think I have an answer for it because this definitely went through my mind. Have blow ruined the 80s Miami Dolphins? How could they not ruin the Hurricanes being more successful during that era? The Hurricanes were a lot more successful, definitely during the latter part of the 80s. They did have some success in the early part, but they definitely had more success in the latter 80s, and they didn't have the buying power that professional athletes have. So you always have to take that into consideration.
Mm.
They are still
So
college.
they had to they could only afford weed.
Yeah, cocaine wasn't on the scholarship.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm
list.
sure those dudes were doing drugs, and also they're a lot younger. But there's
Like sniffing glue.
and so it's a competition. Yeah, being coked out against a really shitty Cal team in 1984 is different than being coked out against the fucking Bears in '86. Well, actually, the Dolphins did win that game. But yes, Last Boy Scout is a great movie that actually kind of talks about drugs and professional sports. But let's try to find a Miami Dolphins player from the '80s that's down on his luck. I'm sure we can fucking find Mark Duper, who might be able to come on the show, or Ed Clayton, or the football player Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and ask them about the amount of cocaine that was done in the locker room before and after the game.
Sports is a black box. I'm gonna log off. You guys.
I'm actually about to be
I
out
literally
myself.
do not even know the rules.
And on that
Yeah.
note, we're gonna go.
No, you guys go ahead. Go ahead.
No, we have to go because it's too long.
My face hurts from laughing.
We've been gone too long. Stefan and I have been joking and talking shit since like 8:30 my time this morning.
Oh.
So, and then
I see,
before that, I was talking shit with Bajalan. So the shit talk has been going on for some time. So
And I believe we might be running, we've hit peak shit, and pretty soon the reserves will be depleted.
Yeah.
peak shit is when you were just stuck. And Summer's like, I hear him talking.
Although I'll say something Kuba said earlier that's gonna like make me lose sleep is when you mentioned that the possibility of critical gender studies or critical gender theory, and like that being like used as the reactionary right. Well, no, I just feel like that's like literally you just gave him the next great thing, and like I'm terrified now.
No, I read it was in the CIA Monthly, right behind crossword.
So on that note,
Right.
Coming up with 22, critical gender theory.
Right under the sports picks.
Coming soon.
The fantasy football picks. It's critical gender.
Oh my God! Get us off the screen! Get us off the screen! Bye, y'all.
They're just trying to put together a Mr. Potato Head. They just don't know how to do it. They're like, I don't know where anything goes. All right, cartoons.